Welcome, everyone, to our reading of the book English Derived from the Hebrew. We're continuing with chapter 3 here, The Dwellings of Men. In the present chapter, I exhibit some of the words belonging to the dwellings of men and their surroundings, and show how they spring from the Hebrew. Let us proceed to a farmhouse and look first at the exterior. Here are the outhouses, the stables for horses, stabel or stabel, a dwelling. The Zion, which is the first letter, is rendered into English and other languages in several ways. It comes to our word, or it from it, this word right here, which is Zion Bet Lamed Zabal. Okay. From it comes our word stall and also dwelling. Now, the Zaudi is usually the ST or the TZ one, but as you'll see, some of these letters change and they're interchangeable with the sounds. Uh, they get really mush mouth, if you will. And if you want to know why, or at least to get some idea as to why there's such violence done to the language, I highly recommend Webster's 1886 dictionary. You can find it at internet.archive.org. I believe it's still online, but it's a very large PDF. And in there, it has the history of the English language. And you can see all of the things that have happened in the history of the language and how it changed over time. But it says, from it comes our word stall and also dwell, the T becoming a D. From it is derived the Latin templum, a temple, by the Chaldaic or Chasdim change of Z into D, whence the Latins change it to T. Here are booths for the smaller cattle. Booth is our rendering of the Hebrew beith, beith, a house, and that should be bet tau, uh, yeah, bet yod tau, sorry. They have the yod there as a double E, beat, beat, right? Hence our birth on board ship with the addition of the R there. Cattle, traced to its origin, would signify creatures kept to be slain. Ket tel, signifying to slay. And that would be right here. Ketel, cattle. You double that T or tet. Kof tet lamed. All right, thence also our word kill with the tet dropped, the middle letter being dropped. There you go. The cattle pens are wattled or wattled, Hebrew hatel, to bind, to bandage, whence comes our words swaddle and huddle. The herd, Hebrew herdar, herd, right? Which is, oh, sorry, where are we? That's number 5. The Hebrew herd, that hey there, or the H, would be the aspiration added to it. But this would be the ayin dalit resh. So the herd is in the field is in stubble, Whence comes this word? From teben, straw. S is added by the Kasdim, which is the Babylonian influence. Here is the sty for the hogs. The Hebrew gives us now suth, or yeah, stew, a corner, granary, or storehouse. The hog takes its name from hoga, to growl, to mutter. Now, that might also be the case, but we also have the Chog, which is the festival, and the hog was eaten at the feasts for when our forefathers went pagan, some of them. But in just to be clear, Scripture never permits us to eat anything common or unclean. There's no there's no injunction anywhere that says that we can now eat things that he originally said we shouldn't. So I don't recommend doing that. You can find in Yeshayahu 65 and 66 what's going to happen for people who have unclean broth and eat swine, for example. So I don't want to get into that. But it says, their places covered with thatch, Hebrew toch, which is right here, number 8. So toch, right, to cover. And the boards with pitch, Hebrew zipped, which signifies the same substance. So pitch would have been with the letters switched around there. Here the letters are curiously transposed, which I just mentioned. The P would be in front, and the Z would be where the P is, and it would be more into a PIT, sorry, and then you'd have the Z, which would make a CH sound as we mush it later on. In Latin, this material is termed pix, so you can see where that switching might have happened. In Greek, pissa. Hence, too, the word asphaltum. There is the where they feed, or the trough rather, sorry, where they feed, and around it is muck. We are indebted to Hebrew for both these words. The first signifying to feed, the second things rotten, corrupt, or putrid. Now, those two words are number 1 and 2 here. So trough, literally tau, resh, pay, trough. And then muck, you'd have mem. In the full Hebrew, you would have a wah here for the U sound. And then the kof, muck. Sheep are derived from keshib, a sheep, the first letter being dropped to make it a monosyllable, and then that P or the B becoming a P. Yonder is the barn, the place for the bar, corn. We call it also the garner, from the Hebrew garan, a threshing floor. We now advance up a path which leads to the farmer's home, that cherished English word. But it also proceeds from the same root as the other. Homa, says Parkus, a wall as of a city for shelter, protection, or defense. And that Homa, number 5 here, is Homa, Cheth, Mem, Hey. The word path is a singular instance of the way in which the original letters are hustled in their transmission from one language to another. It comes from nathab, to tread down. Here the unstable N is first knocked away, and the two last are transposed to form the word path. The house is built partly of stone from yonder quarry, and partly of brick. We trace the quarry to the Hebrew word kuor, to dig, and the brick to brick, a flint. Flints were most probably used before cleans or clines to kila, to roast, were invented. Look up at the east and west gables. They are covered with lattice. Gable in Hebrew signifies a boundary, and rasit, a network. Rasit, the R becoming the L, lattice. I should just keep reading. I'm sorry. I'll try to point these things out because sometimes they don't cover it in every instance, but if I just kept reading, it would have made it explained right there. So please bear with me here, but we're going to get through that. It says here the R is by us changed into its cognate L, and the two last letters are transposed. This is one of the comparatively few cases in which we find the English derivatives to be of two syllables. We go into the garden and find in one corner a heap of rubbish and a quantity of broken tiles. We trace the garden to Gadar, a place fenced off, walled in. The tiles to Tila, Tet Lamed Aleph, to patch up or sew up, or to Tila, Tau Lamed Aleph, to hang up, to suspend, to adhere to anything. And the rubbish we trace to rupish, mire or mud. Hence comes the Greek rupos, dirt. In that corner is a hive with a canvas roof. We derive the first from hib, to wrap round, and the last from rochaf, or rocha, to incline, to let down, to slacken, as opposed to the perpendicular walls. Thence comes our words rump and ramp. We now lift the snake, or sneak, sorry. We now lift the sneck and enter the hall. We owe these words to znek, a chained fastening. So this is an archaic word that we don't really use anymore. But it's a latch on a door or window. And it says it's obscurely related to snatch. And it's chain or fastening. Okay. And to a hall, a tent. They pronounce that in ohel in modern Hebrew now, or the classical biblical Hebrew from 503, Bill Barrick's grammar, 503 grammar. Excuse me. There's a college course on YouTube from the Master's Seminary to learn biblical Hebrew if you want to learn how to read it with the vowel points. He also tells you how to pronounce it according to the vowel points, but I don't consider those legitimate anymore. They were meant to obfuscate certain things, and if you don't use the vowel points, you can see the English letters much easier in some instances. But we'll continue here. It says, thence arise the Greek al alui or auli, there we go, and the Latin aula, a hall. The door is made of fresh planks. We derive the one from daleth, a door, the last letter being dropped. We find another, and that would have made the L become an R, right? We find another cognate word in the last two letters, omitting the first in our word lid. We trace, and that would be backwards from the way it's spelled in the Hebrew or in the English the other way. So just reading it backwards, you get lid. We trace the other word to plach or play, plach, yeah, place, number six here. Pe lamed chet, plech, plach, a slice, plach. So it says, and that's where you get planks, right? Plach. In the hall hangs the farmer's staff, the skid of his chase, his boy's skates, and satchel. The staff we trace to Sabat, which means the same thing. Transpose the letters and change B into its cognate F. The B becoming a P, the P becoming a PH or F. The skid and skates we derive from skid, that'd be sheen, kuf, dalet. To bind or fasten on, hence also our socket. The satchel we find in the Hebrew zakal, a bag which ties. An axe and a sickle hang each suspended from a nail. We search for their origin and find that azad means an axe, and that would be the azad right here, ayin, zaudi, dalet. Hence we derive also our ads and the Greek axini, an axe. The sickle we trace to zlig, to draw out fish hooks. The origin of nail we find in naal, to fasten a bolt, a bar. In a corner is a pot of glue, and beside it a piece of rosin. Glue takes its rise from claw, to restrain or confine. Eh, That says number three here. Number three is Zion Noon Kof. So that doesn't quite right. That would be here we go. It's one, two, and three. It started over. So Kala right here is Kaf, Lamed, Aleph. And then whenever there's either an Aleph or an Ayin, they'll have the W added in the English for claw. Said it is the mother of a numerous progeny, claw, clay, cloy, clue, clef, the Greek kola, glue, and cleis, a key, the Latin gelu, frost or ice, and the French glue, bird lime, and clou, a nail. The rosin and resin we find in zori. Zori would be Zaudi Resh Yod. It means to flow, balm of Gilead or Gilead. Here again, we must transpose. We move on into the saloon and notice the window with its diamond squares of glass and its old-fashioned hasp. The word saloon seems to us at once to rise out of shalun or shalhoun, a table, which comes from the word shalhoun, shin lamed chet, wa nun. That noon is a noon sofit. It's in the modern Hebrew whenever the noon is at the end of a word, just like the mem when it's at the end of a word, it will be the sofit letter, which it is closed there, and this one just goes longer. It doesn't change anything. It's just a font difference. But it comes from shahun, a table. It being the great center of the room, the place of meals. The window we derive from ido, to perceive, to see. Yada, yada, right? And then you'd have the N added there, window, with the W after the ayin, as I'd mentioned before. It says in English, W is generally prefixed to words beginning with this Hebrew letter. The Hebrew word is the parent of many other words which will suggest themselves to the scholar. The glass comes from galas, to shine, to glisten. The hasp from hasb, to contrive, a contrivance. In the center is the table, at the side of the room are shelves, and one broad slab for the sideboard. These three words own as their parent the Hebrew slab, a ledge, a border. The B changed into F gives shelf. The S is exchanged for T by the Kasdim, and from the two other letters transposed, we get tabula, a table. Hence, also, I suppose we obtain our sleeve, or sorry, sieve. Yeah, sleeve. I had that right. And the Irish name for a flat-topped mountain, I can't pronounce that right. Sleeve, as sleeve bloom. While the French also owned the Salve or Saleve as one of the lower mountains adjacent to Mount Blanc. The lip and lap come from the same root, the S omitted. Because slip and slap are already words, they dropped those to keep the meaning with what was left of the root. But we do not pretend to trace out every derivative. It is a field boundless. On the sideboard stands a box of snuff and a bottle of gum. We detect the first of these words in nesnub or nesub, to breathe, to blow, to inhale, and transpose the letters accordingly. The S N U B, and that becomes an F, snuff, right? The second we detect in the Hebrew gam, which is right here, gimel mem, right? To join together. Whence also the Greeks, as we observed, derive their gamos, marriage. The carpet, and remember, Greek is an amalgamation of Hebrew and Latin. I haven't read the book yet, but there's a few that are written on the topic of the affinity of the Gaelic of the Highlands of Scotland with Hebrew, which that Gaelic is from the Caledonians. The ancient history of Caledonia is their history that we've covered, but we haven't read all of it. I have talked about it quite often, though. Um, then the gentleman that wrote that book also wrote about that particular Gaelic Hebrew's influence on the ancient Greek, and then that influence on the ancient Latin. And he traces these things very well. You see a little bit of that phenomenon in this book as we go over some of the prefixes and suffixes for Latin and Greek words and how it's straight Hebrew, which is very interesting to me because we do the same thing too, but we don't really recognize it anymore. The carpet is of good Kidder minister fabric or Minster fabric, and over the cradle is a canopy. The name of our modern fabric retraced to the antique carpus, fine white linen, and the classical scholar remembers that the word is used by both Latins and Greeks to signify sails and etc. The cradle we derive from charad, to shake, to flutter, because of the perpetual rocking. The chet, or the H in Hebrew, immediately joins R. There we, having no such commencing sound, use C instead of H. The canopy is from canop, a wing. So canop E is my wing or my covering, right? We move on into the kitchen, which is furnished with a settle, stools, and benches. We discover the two first in the Hebrew setel, to fix, to plant firmly. And then that's setel, sheen, tau, lamed. Whence our word still. Bench is traceable to pet, pech, to spread out, a thin plate. The N being added as strengthening and defining the root. Probably our word patch is an offspring from the same parent. There is a tub filled with the water butt outside, and a bucket set beside it. We see an old acquaintance in the two first words. Elohim describes the ship of Noah as tube, a tub. A friend accurately suggested that the Greek neus, the Latin navis, right? A ship, where we get the word navy and our own word navy, spring from Noah, which is pretty neat. But the word we were looking for right there was pach, pe, chet. Oh, I'm sorry, we're looking for tub, the next one. Toba, tub, right? Tau, bait, hay. Transpose the first two letters and you get boat, but, while punt comes from the same source. We derive bucket from bouquet, a bottle. The fire comes from coals, or is of coals rather, and the meat is turning on the spit. We find our fire in the Hebrew beor, to burn, and to it we trace the Greek peor, fire, and the Latin furo, to rage, with many like words in other languages. The coals we find in gahel, burning coals, and the spit in spit, yes, spit, to place, to set. Thence too we derive the pots we see set on the dresser, for the same word signifies cooking vessels. We seem to have dropped the S at the beginning, that we might not confound the word with spots. The hearth is encumbered with cinders, which have ceased to emit smoke, while from the vessels of the hob comes forth a savory steam. We detect the original of smoke and steam in zamoch, to sprout, to throw off shoots, to cause something to rise. And that zamoch right here is Zaudi, Mame, Faith. And it says, which applied first to vegetables at length took a wider sense. In the latter word, the final Hebrew letter is omitted, and we get steam. The original of hearth we find in har, to burn. Hence, also our word char, that char, to burn, right? That should be chet resh. That of cinders is kudar, to be dark or black, and that of hob in chab, a bosom. A box of matches and a piece of tinder lie side by side. We see the original of match in machaz, to smite, dash, shake, agitate, and that of tinder in tanur, an oven, a furnace. The D is a complementary letter, giving it a more forcible sound. At the foot of the stove lies the tongs. We discover the source of stove in nestov, to set, to place a fixture. Here again, the unstable letter N drops off. The tongs we detect in netok, to touch, to clash. Here the N is not dropped, but transposed to the middle of the word, and tong becomes tongs. A flitch of bacon hangs from the rafter. Some dough and suit are lying on the dresser. The flitch we find in flitch, to cleave asunder, a slice. The dough in toch, to roll together, to twist. Hence also our word twine. The suit from zood, to swell. Whence also our word stew. Besides these articles is a jar protected by wickerwork, and a cauldron is boiling on the fire. The jar we derive from, it says jar, to close up a covered vessel, but that's really, we want to look at number one here, zar, so that would be a Zion resh, not, not a J. But that would have changed as time went on, right? Remember, the J did not actually exist in the English language until the 1600s. It says jar, to close up a covered vessel, from netzar, to keep a store vessel. Hence, by transposition, our nurse. The cauldron is from korot, a deep plate or vessel, and the verb to boil we find in bu'u, to swell or bubble up. Whence comes our restless sea boy? We find okoel, to twist, very torturous, as the origin of wicker. The word begins with the strange letter ion, which is frequently rendered into English by W. The change for L, or L for R, is thoroughly established. A skewer lies beside some scraps to be given to the dogs. We trace skewer to zor, to compress, to close up, and that zor is Zion wa resh. The Zion not unfrequently is rendered in English by CS. The scraps we derive from garab, to scrap, to which, for energy's sake, we prefix an S. So also does the Kasdim. Hence comes also the Scotch grab, to seize greedily. A basket of parched peas stands on the table. A nutmeg garter hangs by a string on the wall. We find a bud of basket in We find the bud of basket in sebek or shebek, to pleat, to make wicker work. And we transpose the letters. We also find the letters of parch in a reverse order in hareb, to dry up. To grate we discover garad, to scratch, to scrape, and string in stink, to bind. R is added by the Kasdim. A kettle simmers on the stove. The coal scuttle stands in the chimney corner. We trace kettle, scuttle, and skillet to quilchet, a cauldron, pot, or kettle. S being often added into English to words beginning with K. The simmering we discover in the Hebrew zimar, to sing. A lighted candle stands near the oven, and embers of the oven have almost become ashes. Looking into our lexicon, we see that lachat, whence our light means to burn, a flame. That candle comes from delak, to burn, whence probably the Latin diligo, to love, arises. But we have to transpose the letters and then perceive that kindle and candle, with all their trained in other languages, spring from this root. The embers come from efar, ashes, and the word ashes from ash, fire. So efar is where we get the word for ashes, and ash is where we get the word for fire. But that's where our word ash came from. Besides the oven is a sack filled with faggots and a pail. The sack was known by the same sound to the Hebrews. Sack, sheen, kof, right? The faggot arises from aged, a bundle, the digamma being prefixed to make it faggot. The pail comes from nebel, a bottle, the n being omitted. We ascend the stairs to the bedroom, rather, and find a bed with a hair mattress and a quilt. The stairs are provided for us in the Hebrew sedar, which we make into one syllable. The Hebrew signifies to set in order, rows. Bed we derive from matach, the M, or the Hebrew M, sometimes becoming in our language changed into B. Thence also our mat. Mattress is the heftifel participle of aras, to stretch oneself, a bed. Hence also our hearse, the bed of the deceased. The quilt we find in the same Hebrew letters, quilt, which is number 3 here, and that would be kof lamed tet, quilt. To contract or shrink up, referring to its doublings in seams. We see on the other side of the room a towel rail, a washing stand, a piece of soap, and some soap suds. We discover wash in kavash. The C says Parkhurst is transferred to the end, and we have the Saxon vesken and the English wash. The soap owns its original to zoab, to pine away. The suds in zud, to swell, boil, or bubble. We also find the root of towel in tuah, to twist or roll together. There is nothing in the attic but lumber. The Hebrew atik is a gallery. But it is time to descend For the supper is ready in the chamber below. Chamber from caram, Latin camera, an enclosed space. On the table are laid in orderly array a knife, fork, plate, and spoon for each. We dip again into Hebrew and discover knife from nikif, to strike, to cut down, the letters being transposed. So the French canaf or canif, fork, we find in nafik, to draw forth, are inserted by the kasdim and the unstable and removed from the front. We trace plate to plate, something smooth, flat, and spoon in asp to collect, the N of the close being diminutive, as in Samson, which signifies a little man, or sorry, a little son. The letters, as in so many previous instances, are transposed. At each corner of the table is a vessel of salt. This, with its cognates in other languages, is derived from nazel, to melt. And nazel, salt melts the snow, so that's an interesting thing. Here again, and it melts in your mouth when you eat it, right? But here again, the commencing N falls away, and out of two Hebrew syllables we make one in English. A jug of water, cups, and etc. adorn the table. We recognize the bud of jug in zuk or juk, to pour out. The origin of cup in cup, a hollow hand, which would be cough pay. The tea caddy and urn grace the sideboard. A lamp fed with naphtha diffuses its light. We trace caddy, Latin cadis, to a cask, to its root in cad, a pitcher, pail, bucket, and urn to arun, a chest. We see that lamp has its origin in lapid, a torch, whence the Greek and Latin lampedis, torches, and are limpid. The M is here complementary. The English again omits the last letter in order to preserve a word of monosyllable. Nef, nefach, number 6 here. Nefat. In Hebrew means honey, a strange alteration of meaning, of which there are examples, not a few. So the oil they use is the word that they have for a word for honey, which I am not familiar with. The word for honey I am familiar with is this has a dalet in it, I believe. It says the loaf is set on the table, and you may choose crumb or crust. Crumb we detect in karub, the interior. The M before B being the usual complementary letter, and again a monosyllable results from the two in Hebrew. Crust we observe to arise out of chust, the exterior, R being the addition of the kasdim. Here is a dish of poached eggs, the yolk being very conspicuous. We dip into the lexicon. Poach is to spread out, and yaruk is to be yellow. Hence comes the yolk, the yellow of the egg. In the dishes before us are fish, flesh, and fowl. We trace dish to natish, to spread abroad. Again, the luckless N is discarded, and the monosyllable wins the day. The origin of fish we has been given before. Flesh we cannot help deriving from besher, which means the same thing in Hebrew. The B becomes F, the R becomes L, and is transferred to the third place, or from the third place to the second, when we have the English word flesh. Whence also our word butcher. The man who sells flesh in Scotland is the flesher. The derivation of foul is not so clear, for here we have to deal with the Proteus like letter ayin. The A bird in Hebrew is Oluf. Reverse the letters and you have fool, fa'u, whence I believe springs our English foul. You just add the L there. And that would be by taking this word, ayin, wa, pe, full, o. You just have the L and it'd be foul. The meat is a loin of lamb, very fat. There are also cheese and butter. Lamb in Hebrew is amar, in Greek, amnos. We take the R of the conclusion, change it into L, and prefix it. Hence also our ram and the llama. Butter, fat, and food we trace to fudar, fat. Cheese we trace to Jerez, which means the same thing. We have here omitted the letter or the middle letter R in order to retain the monosyllable. There is wine drawn from the lees, which is sweet, and beer, which is but sour. Wine, as many know, springs from yin, Latin, vinum, Greek, oinos, French, vin, and so on. The lees are in Hebrew, lachis, to press or squeeze, and the remains of the grape skins or stone after pressure has been applied. Sour is letter for letter the Hebrew sor, to turn aside. Sweet owes its origin to dibs. Honey of bees, that's the divash, is right, dibs, right? Honey of bees or of grapes. We reverse the order of the letters, changing B into W and D into its allied T. When we get the English sweet. Thence also the Latin suavis. With the ending of the mil, my paper concludes mela, signifying fullness, mela, to be full. And that will do it for that chapter. Next one will be chapter 4 with the great objects of nature, and we'll see you for that next time. You have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever time of day it might be, and we'll talk to you later. Shalom.